Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up. And as always, I'm joined by Swig, co-host here at the Big City Sports Podcast. And look, the White Sox got eliminated. They're no longer in the playoffs. So did the Yankees. Don't worry about it. We're not talking baseball for a little while. We'll do an end of season wrap in the coming weeks, maybe about a month or so when we really dive into that. But football, on that aspect, the Jets lost in London, the Giants lost, and they lost everybody. And the Bears won another football game, beating the Las Vegas Raiders. But today we're talking hockey, a lot of hockey coverage, NHL season preview, and all that good stuff. But first of all, Swig, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. Excited to get into the hockey talk, but outside of that, the other sports are just making me wallow in my own sadness and a bottomless pit of despair. So it's been a challenge for me to get out of it. And then I was excited to talk hockey, and then I watched the Rangers opener tonight, and then it just buried me further back underneath it. So it's been a couple of rough weeks in sports for me, but I am excited to get into it. We all know how big both of us are into hockey, so that's going to be fun. But I think we just need to vent a little bit about football here first.
Yeah, we do. And I'm with you there, getting ready to talk hockey. I was excited. Then I watched the first period of the Blackhawks game, watched Marc-Andre Fleury face 16 shots on goal, give up 3 to the President Trophy winner, Colorado Avalanche. It's a 4-1 contest now. So tough one there. But, let's dive right into this football talk. We're going to keep it really brief here. Not really much to expand on. We'll start with the New York Jets. They took on they played the Atlanta Falcons, down a couple receivers. You made that point last week. Hey, the Browns are out there too last year. This year, they beat a team like the Tennessee Titans without their 2 receivers. The Falcons were without Russell Gage, Calvin Ridley. Kyle Pitts, though, had a big day.
Pitts did, and so did Cordero Patterson, who looks kind of revitalized, if I'm being honest. He's been a bright spot for the Falcons so far this year, and I know that some of our Bears fans listeners are just going to get PTSD from hearing that name. But those two were, unfortunately for the Jets, enough to take care of business for the Falcons, who scored on their first 3 trips at a 17-0 lead. And the Jets, frankly, lost a winnable game here because they had another slow start and a really, really sluggish first half. And that's been a theme. We saw it in the Titans game, but they managed to recover from that one. But we also saw it in the opener against the Panthers. We've seen them not be able to overcome that a couple of times this season. And the Jets now, after the London trip, have their bye. If they're going to have any chance to squeak out a couple of these games, like we know that they're not going to win any more than, say, 5 games at the most, probably. But if they're going to squeak out a couple of them, they're going to have to fix those slow starts. Otherwise, it's just going to get uglier.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Zach Wilson knows how to play football in the first half. I mean, his yardage yards total doesn't look good at all. The completion percentage is a joke in the first half, but it seems like it does start clicking in the second. So you're right. Maybe that's something they can fix on the bye week. Now, let's head over to the New York Giants. And the Giants, they had a very, very tough game against the Dallas Cowboys, lost Saquon to a sprained ankle early in the game. Then Daniel Jones took a shot to the head. He was a little dizzy, got to get up on that one. So hope everybody's doing well there. Also lost a couple receivers that are down. Kadarius Toney looked good, threw a punch. What were your takeaways from the Giants?
That was, without exaggeration, one of the worst Giants games I've ever had to sit through. The combination of the score, the opponent, the constant injuries, just there was nothing to be happy about with that game outside of Toney, and even that ended prematurely and didn't really change anything. It was just frustrating as hell. Really quick before I go into a short rant this week, I want to tie that Jets and Giants thing together. One positive with the Jets, you see Franklin Myers signed the contract extension.
Yes.
Which is a really cool story. He got $55 million for somebody who came from, let's say, not a lot of background pedigree, for example. And his favorite defensive player growing up was O.C. Umenyiora. Good taste, by the way, I might add. And I saw this really cool interview on Twitter where he got to meet Umenyiora, and Umenyiora gave him his contact info so they could go over some pass rushing tips. So just before I get into the rage here, wanted to give one very small dose of positivity. I thought that was really cool. Phenomenal. Now, I am so angry right now. The injuries are one thing. Yeah, Jones has had a couple of injuries before. Obviously, you don't ever want to mess with concussions. I hope he's okay. Even if he does clear protocols this week, I say don't bother starting him against the Rams because Aaron Donald will just give him another concussion, and that is a dangerous game. And we're going to lose regardless of who plays quarterback. The Saquon injury is frustrating for a different reason because that was clearly a fluke, but also with him stepping on the foot of a Cowboys player, nothing intentional or anything. Jones threw him a pass that went about 6 feet over his head, and a better one that probably doesn't happen. The offensive line looked terrible. The Galladay injury, I mean, he continues to battle nagging injuries like he did when he was with the Lions. It is very frustrating. So by the end of the game, the Giants had Kadarius Toney, who did play extremely well. I'm willing to look past the punch for the most part because the game was over regardless, but still a frustrating way to end a very, very promising day for him. And whatever is left of Ingram were pretty much the only skill position guys left by the end of the game. And what the fuck happened to our defense, man?
Yeah, the defense did not look good at all. James Bradbury got cooked a couple times in the game. I mean, there's a lot of lack coverage in that area. The Cowboys do have a potent offense. I'll give them that. I mean, they have plenty of playmakers on the outside. Amari Cooper, nursing a hamstring injury, still found a way to put up a touchdown at 50 yards. CD Lamb, a great target. He put up some yardage. Dalton Schultz, a breakout tight end for them. They got the backs in the backfield with Elliott and Pollard. So there's a lot of moving pieces on this Dallas offense. But to your credit, this defense, we mentioned it earlier this week or earlier in the show, the last few weeks. We said, look, this defense does not look the same. Even with Patrick Graham still as the defensive coordinator, they don't look like they're clicking right now. And that could be problematic as we head down the stretch.
It is problematic. It already is problematic here. Let's be realistic. This season's already teetering on the brink at best. Bradbury, I'm going to give the most blame to here, and it's not just frustrating. It's really disappointing considering he was an elite corner just last season. I don't know what's going on there, but he cost us 3 different times in the game. I mean, he got burned for the one long touchdown from Lamb. He had a pass interference on a third down where it was incomplete, would have been fourth, held him to 3, and then he dropped an interception that was where he did make the right read for once, and then they threw the touchdown to Cooper on the next pass. Plays like that lose us games or lose any team games. If a road team or the underdog is going to pull off the upset, they need to be opportunistic when they can change the outcome in their favor. Giants didn't do that. The Cowboys tried to keep us around for a bit. They fumbled that snap on the goal line on the 4-yard line, but the Giants didn't do anything with it. It's just horrible game. The injuries only made it worse. I expect the Giants to be well under 100% against the Rams here coming up, which is all we need. So we'll see. Shepard and Slayton, they might play, but I don't think it's going to matter too much if I'm being honest with you. The defense is even more frustrating because it's healthy outside of Blake Martinez, and it still looks terrible. And Gettleman here, we'll get into him more when we have a longer football episode, but yeah, I've hated him from the start. 4th year with the Giants, and he said, hey, we're going to run the ball, protect the quarterback, and stop the run. And 4 years later, the Giants can do exactly 0 of those things. And on the offensive line in particular, outside of the possible exception of Andrew Thomas, there are 0 sure things on that offensive line. So he hasn't made any progress. Get him the fuck out of New York.
Well taken, well taken. So I admire your opinion on the Giants. I think those are some good points brought up. I would keep an eye out for John Ross, someone to keep an eye on as we head into next week. Maybe he catches a deep ball like he did a few weeks ago. That wide receiver room's getting pretty thin. But let's head over to the Chicago Bears, final team we talk football here. The Bears, Justin Fields, they found a way to put it together last week. I thought the team looked good. No David Montgomery, but Khalil Herbert got 70 yards of rushing. Damian Williams also looked good in that backfield. They found a way to piece it together, and they beat a Las Vegas Raiders team.
Yeah, they were really physical. They dominated in the trenches, both sides. Yeah, all those things Gettleman said the Giants would be able to do. But give the Bears credit. They really did take advantage. Now, I think they played the Raiders at a really, really good time, thanks to some circumstances that were out of their control. All the John Gruden situation, all that kind of blew up in the week leading up to the game. And I'm not trying to speculate too much. Gruden since has resigned, but I'm wondering how much that impacted the Raiders' preparation situation going in, but give the Bears credit for taking advantage if it did have a negative impact on them. Montgomery's looked really good, but the Bears offensive line played very well. Damian Williams, Khalil Herbert, they both look good, and they really dominated on the defensive side as well. The Raiders couldn't get anything going there. They had the one touchdown in the fourth quarter, but that was it. And they didn't even get the 2-point conversion. I thought the game was over then because I was pretty confident the Raiders weren't getting in the end zone again, and they didn't. So give them credit where it's due. I get the Bears are off to a solid start. They probably won't be the benefit of those bizarre circumstances for every team they play, but they've been they're a really hard team to figure out, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. The Bears are both of these teams. I mean, you look at the Raiders; they're a team that usually collapses in the second half. At least they were under John Gruden. But I mean, right now, I mean, the Bears, on the other hand, Matt Nagy, you never know what's going on with him. But look, this is a tough game coming up. Last thing we'll touch here on the Bears before we get into hockey. Look, they got the Packers this Sunday, and it's going to be a tough test for the rookie quarterback in Justin Fields. Do you think that that's something in the back of his mind that maybe, hey, we can go out there and beat the Bears, or not the Bears, we can go out there and beat the Packers? You think that's something that they're fired up about, and see if Bears fans can see if he gets it done?
Yeah, I think they're going to be ready for it, or at least they're going to have some level of confidence going into it. They've gotten a little bit better here over the last couple of weeks. They've taken advantage of a couple of bad teams on the schedule and then the bizarre Raiders situation. So I think they're going to have some confidence. Now, we'll see. It might turn out to be false confidence, at least for a week. The Packers are definitely the better team on paper, but we're seeing more and more from Justin Fields as a leader here every week. I think there's definitely some positives to take away. Now, he is going to have to start shouldering more of the offensive responsibility at some point, but I think it's wise for the Bears to just be easing him in a little bit, relying on their pretty strong run game, even with the loss of Montgomery. And that's definitely going to give him a little bit more of a transition period. But as the schedule gets more difficult, he is going to have to do more with his arm for the Bears to have any chance to win. I think he is capable, but we're also going to see some growing pains at some point, at least so I've been told.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. It's gonna be something. You can take it on the Packers. Obviously, is a tough test, even only in your third career game. So tough one there for Justin Fields, but we'll see how it turns out on Sunday. So with that, we're gonna switch over to the Chicago Blackhawks. Start getting into our hockey talk. But I know we've teased stuff over the last few weeks or last month or so. We've been diving into what has taken place with the Blackhawks off the ice scandal, and we do have one quick little update on that before we get into the on ice predictions for the 2021 season.
Yeah, we definitely want to reiterate that anything that happens with this is a lot more important than anything that happens on the ice. I did look into it. I know we both have. There isn't a ton that's happened in the legal process since the last time we talked about this a month or two ago. Anyone who's not familiar, very brief recap. During the Blackhawks 2010 Stanley Cup run, their video coach, Brad Aldrich, was sexually assaulting at least one or two of the players on the in the Blackhawks team. Those players reported it to Paul Vincent, the skills coach. He reported it to the rest of the front office, the higher ups, who refused to report it to the police. The Blackhawks' excuses for not doing so were extremely weak, just talking about how the statute of limitations had been thrown out and that the players weren't minors and under the age of 18. That's bad. When the Blackhawks let him leave, he eventually went to a high school in Michigan and sexually assaulted a teenager. So really, really bad situation there. Since then, the main update has been an independent investigation has been launched into all of this, and the Blackhawks CEO Danny Wirtz. The most recent update I could find is that he at least seemed open to committing to making those findings of the investigation public when it's complete, and I think that's a good thing. But that's the only update, the only meaningful one I've been able to find recently. I am extremely curious to see how that situation plays out because it is horrifying. We have to make sure that's known.
Yeah, it's definitely not a great thing to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. I mean, there's some people that might have just heard this for the very first time, and that's not a good thing because the NHL should be reporting big issues like this and making sure that everything is talked about and expanded, and maybe that'll all come to fruition once we find out exactly what took place during that scandal. But I mean, we won't know until it all comes out. So hopefully it does come out. Hopefully everything is resolved here in a timely manner. But until then, let's get into the on ice situation here with the Chicago Blackhawks. And on ice, it doesn't look pretty so far tonight, but we're not talking about tonight. We're talking about the whole 82 game season coming ahead. Let's take a look at the Chicago Blackhawks roster. Couple additions. They brought in Marc-Andre Fleury, the goaltender. Him and Kevin Lankinen, who had a great year last year, will be a solid, I wouldn't say tandem, but I think Fleury's going to take most of the load there. Lankinen's still going to be nice to develop under a Marc-Andre Fleury type. You bring in some cup winners, one being Tyler Johnson, a second line center who's in there for Dylan Strome in the first game. Dylan Strome, a healthy scratch. So I think that's another nice addition. You brought over the big fish and Seth Jones on the defensive end. His brother Caleb Jones, Jake McCabe. I mean, there's a bunch of talent surrounding this team that you brought in the offseason. Is there anyone that you're willing to talk about right now, or is there? What do you think it'll all gel together like?
It's going to be really interesting to see it over the course of the season. I think it's going to be a very, very fluid situation. And then the potential for the off-ice bombshell at some point to drop during the middle of this season could throw a whole wrench into everything, possibly like it did with the Raiders. But if something like this happens, it could have an even bigger, let's say, domino effect. On the ice, though, I thought the Fleury situation was kind of interesting where he ended up in Chicago. Vegas last year, Fleury won the Vezina Trophy for the best goalie in the league with Vegas, and then they essentially told him fuck off, and he had considered retiring for a brief amount of time, but I think he's going to come in motivated. I think it'll be good for Lankinen as well. I don't think it would be great for him to be the full-time number one yet, especially over an 82 game season. So I expect it to be relatively even. I'd say like 60-40, maybe 65-35, and how they break up the starts percentage wise. I think Fleury will get more of the starts, but not by a huge amount. I think they do want to get Lankinen in a decent amount of work. But I think the key for this team's success is definitely their extremely talented offense. And those top three lines they're pretty dangerous, especially at center.
Yeah, they are at center. I mean, the center depth is insane on this team. You get Jonathan Toews back. That's another one I should have mentioned in the first read. I mean, the captain's back. He's back out there on the ice. Your center depth is insane. Kirby Dach, first round pick a few years ago. He's your third line center right now. I mentioned Dylan Strome being a healthy scratch. Ryan Carpenter, a good scrapper on that fourth line. I mean, there's just so much center depth on this team. And the forwards on the outside, too. Dominic Kubalik, a hard shot. Philip Kurashev had a great year last year. You got DeBrincat. You got Kane. You bring in some other pieces surrounding them. I mean, Brandon Hagel looked great last year. There's a lot of good pieces on this Hawks offense. And I really want to dive in. Now, we saw a great year from Alex DeBrincat last year. The year before that, it was a little bit strange. Like, hockey players sometimes have these great years, and then just for some reason, they drop off. You look at Patrick Laine a few years ago. DeBrincat, do you think what we saw last year is what he's going to bring on a consistent basis, or do you think it's somewhere sandwiched between his down year in 2020 and his up year in 21?
Well, I think there's a lot of factors. I don't think it's quite as simple for these players as they just have good and bad years. I think there's a lot of factors that go in, especially when Laine got to Columbus, for example. But DeBrincat, I do think he is one of the better goal scorers in the NHL. So I expect him at the very least to be more like he was last season than the down year the year before. You can look at the shooting percentage as one big factor, by the way. But so we talk about the center depth right now. We got the return of Toews, who missed last season, and Kirby Dach, who came back at the end of last year, but wasn't a huge factor in last season overall. He had the strong bubble. Before that, I expect him. So Tyler Johnson is a second line center, like you mentioned, that was forced to the bottom six in Tampa because of their absurd amount of depth on these last two cup winners. I expect him to have a pretty good impact in those wingers. So I expect it to be Kubalik and Toews and Kurashev, but we've seen that Kubalik and Toews pairing in the past just absolutely flourish. And I think it'll take a little time for Toews just getting back onto the ice after a while off, but I think they're going to reestablish that connection pretty quickly. Then you got DeBrincat and Kane centering Johnson on the second line, or flanking Johnson on the second line, and I think that's going to be really dangerous too. Where I have the questions, the main offensive piece I think that was lost would be Pia Suter. I think he was the biggest overall loss for the Blackhawks, and considering what they have coming in, I think that can be offset. But I do think Dach doesn't quite have the same line mates. Now, obviously, Kane and DeBrincat, et cetera, they don't grow on trees, but I don't think that say Brandon Hagel is going to have the same impact around him that some of those top 6 guys would. So I am curious to see if they experiment a little, maybe try Doc on the second line and move Tyler Johnson down to the third just to put him in a better position to succeed.
That's something I could see. And I did see a couple times in the preseason, you did see Dylan Strome play the wing a couple times. So maybe you put him back in that wing position. We tried it last year, or not last year, the year that Doc was healthy and they were all there together. The center depth was still nice because you still had Artem Anisimov then. So they tried moving Strome out to a wing. And I mean, he's not he's a natural center that can't win a faceoff. So it's tough that he's good being in the center of the ice, but you put him out on a wing and it sort of takes him out of position, but he's still a talented hockey player. So I don't think they know what they want to do with Dylan Strome right now. I think he's the first piece to be traded here in the coming days. If anyone's looking to add anything like that. But I mean, it's just a tough spot. To your point, I do think they'll bring up Kirby Dach just to get him some reps because, like you said, Brandon Hagel's not Patrick Kane. He's not going to, especially if Doc struggles, I think that's when you start, okay, maybe you drop someone down a little bit. Maybe you move them up. Just switch up the pairings a little bit in that area. But I did want to touch on the defense a little bit too. You bring in Seth Jones, you lose Duncan Keith. That still kills me to this day. But, there's a lot of moving pieces on the defense. Riley Stillman came in, and he's looking all right. I mean, I don't know how I feel about this defense yet, but it's going to be a work in progress. A lot of chemistry trying to still be there. But how do you think the defense will play this year?
I think Seth Jones is going to be the biggest X factor one way or the other. I have a lot more questions about the defense than I do the offense. And I agree, by the way, that Dylan Strome's getting traded. I think Ottawa might be a possibility. I saw an article mention that.
Did with Anisimov.
Well, Anisimov got cut from a PTO recently, I believe. So I don't think he's going to be a factor anymore. Saw the article suggest Ottawa because of the Colin White situation there. But other teams know that the Blackhawks are pretty deep at center. So he's not exactly going to get the maximized return. Defensively, though, I mean, you want to talk about a return. How about everything Columbus got for Seth Jones? Because the Blackhawks are making a big gamble here, one way or the other. They traded Boquist. They traded 2 first-round picks to Columbus. They got Jones. I know you don't like Boquist. I'm just saying that was the package. And
I was more stung about the 2 first-round picks.
Right. One of which was 12th overall, I think, in this past draft. I think the Blackhawks did get a second rounder back, but they also sent one to Columbus in the deal. So yeah, that kind of balances out. So you're talking about giving up a former top 10 pick and 2 first rounders for a Jones, who I understand has been on a horrible team the last couple of years, but definitely did not look as good as he did when he first came up with Nashville. And then they doubled down on that risk by giving Seth Jones a monster contract, 8 years, 76 million, 9.5 a year, I believe. So he doesn't play well, that's going to turn into a disaster quickly. Now, even if he does play well, I don't consider him in the elite category. I really don't. I think it's more pedigree for him than I know he's a different kind of player than say Adam Fox or a Cale Makar or one of those other young right-handed defensemen are, but I don't see that same kind of upside for him. And I think the best case scenario is he plays relatively well for say 3 or 4 years, and then they're in trouble after that because he seems likely to eventually hit that wall like any player does after a certain age.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, he's a puck moving defenseman. He moves really well, but he's not, I made this point tonight, and I know I tend to overreact when I watch this, but look, I have bad teams that I root for. The Cubs got beat by the Pirates in their opener. Notre Dame went to overtime against Florida State in their opener. The Jags lost to Houston in their opener. Look, I'm an overreactor. Okay. I know what happens. So I'm going to put it out here. The Chicago Blackhawks defense hasn't been the same since they lost the 2 best defensive defensemen that they've had in a long time with Nicholas Hjalmarsson and Nick Leddy. Those 2 were big pieces to that defense. It was Hjalmarsson Oduya, Leddy Roosevelt, whatever it is. Those 2 were broken up to where you had a defensive defenseman on 2 of the 3 pairings, and the other 3 had 2 great defensemen in Keith and Seabrook. So, I mean, you had great defensive defensemen that could play the position well, shot block, and do all those great things. I don't see that with this Hawks team. I see a lot of puck movers. I see a Seth Jones who can get up and activate a little bit, not as much as Boquist did. He wasn't a forward. But, you can go out there and try to make some plays. But Calvin DeHaan, makes me sick. I can't watch him anymore. And it sucks because he's on my favorite team. I got to close my eyes when that line comes on the ice.
Well, too bad you're stuck with him right now. And I think DeHaan and Jones might end up playing a decent amount together. I am really curious to see what the pairs are. And I think like you still have a couple of flyer kind of like take a flyer on them kind of guys after them, like with the Connor Murphys of the world, Riley Stillman, Ian Mitchell. I expect them maybe you get lucky and they turn into solid NHL players, or at least one of them does. But that's definitely a high risk, high reward approach to the defense. So there's most likely going to be a middle ground where they end up being decent, second or third pair defensemen, but nothing that moves the needle. So you're going to be relying on the offense a lot and that goaltending tandem. So to me, it's just kind of an interesting way to build the roster. That offense is still extremely talented. I expect it to be one of the better ones in the NHL. I have a lot of questions about that defense. I think the Seth Jones situation is not going to end well. Most 8-year contracts don't, but I have a feeling that's going to turn into a problem sooner rather than later. And you could make the argument it wasn't even the worst move like that made for a defenseman, because you remember the Flyers trade for Rasmus Ristolainen?
Oh yeah, they did.
Yeah, I think that there were a lot of questionable moves. So you see how much guys who can move the puck are valued. And then I know those analytics don't tell the whole story and everything with the possession numbers and everything, but Seth Jones do not paint a pretty picture. And he's way too young to have such a steep decline on those analytic models. They're far from perfect, but I know we're harping on him a lot, but I think he is just going to be really, really important to the team one way or the other.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you make a good argument there. The Hawks are going to be an interesting team to watch all year. I mean, a lot of people have them pegged to potentially sneak into a playoff spot. They went completely in. They threw all their chips in the casino. I am questioning a little bit. Last thing here on the Blackhawks, I'm questioning the head coach. Jeremy Colleton, Mr. I chew the gum, I stand on the top step, and I talk about my hockey team guy. He's a pretty guy with the glasses. That's all he is. No, I think he's someone that, he's been around. He's been around this group for a while. I mean, he took over in late 2018, was it? And he's been there ever since. So he's a young coach. He's been around, though, and he's got the respect of the locker room, but he continues to make – I know it's one night. I'm not going to react over one night. I'm not a big Jeremy Colleton guy. But I would have preferred a veteran coach lead a team like this. But do you think there's any chance Colleton's fired by the end of or the start of November?
Well, that would be a pretty dramatic change, I think. If the Blackhawks get off to a really horrible start, then maybe. But by the start of November, I mean, that's 2.5 weeks from now. End of November?
Yeah.
I mean, we'd be 20, 25 games in by then.
They fired Quenneville pretty early in the season, didn't they? Was that mid-November?
Yeah, I mean, there is a precedent to it. We've seen teams do that before, kind of out of nowhere. Hell, we've seen it later in the season sometimes too. There was that whole coaching carousel a couple of years ago that seemed to start in February. So there's a lot of factors there, but I'd be surprised if he got fired that quick. I think they like the idea of a younger coach, but I think there's some pressure on him to show that the rebuild is kind of coming to a final stage and that they're at the very least contenders to make the playoffs. And much less they might have. I think they have a chance to get in this division, even though it is very deep. I think we all can agree the Avalanche are a lock to get into the playoffs. But outside of that, and the Coyotes being terrible, I think the other 6 teams in that division all have arguments for it. I think you could make a case for the Stars or the Wild or the Blues or the Jets even, or even the Predators. So there's going to be some competition there.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's true. Let's take a look at it real quick. We'll look at the division, try to see where we'll predict where they end up at the end of the year. Obviously, Arizona in that division, Colorado, Chicago, Dallas, Minnesota, Nashville, St. Louis, and Winnipeg. I think the Hawks finish 4th in that division.
Yeah, I think 3rd or 4th is a target, and they're going to need to finish at least that high in order to have a legitimate chance to make the playoffs. I don't think it's impossible at all. If they do get in, I would be surprised if they advance very far, depending on any moves at the deadline, because that defense is going to be a detriment to them once they start playing the better teams. Like, I expect the Avalanche to be able to score 4 or 5 goals whenever they play each other.
Yeah, I also expect that. I mean, there's
like they are right now.
Yeah, they're putting a beating down on opening night. They're putting a lot of pucks in the back of the net. Another name that also joined the Blackhawks, Eric Gustafson. Welcome back. You can't skate, so that'll be fun to watch him on the power play because he's gonna elevate and he's not going to play defense because he's an offensive defenseman and he's gonna allow people to blow by him. So when we play Edmonton, make sure you're betting on the over.
I mean, hey, you want to talk about somebody who's been around a while and knows the system, though. I mean, I don't hate it. I think as a sixth or seventh defenseman, like he can still run a power play a little bit. Is he going to get 60 points like he did a couple years ago? Probably not. But I don't hate that one. I get the logic a lot more than I do with Jones. To me, it's a lot lower risk, high reward, and the Blackhawks clearly like bringing value having him around.
Yeah, I mean it's a nice addition. Last thing, I know I said last thing a lot. Last thing, one quick hit. We'll move over to the Rangers. Look, they sent down Philip Kurashev just to the minors for like one day, and the very next day they call him up. He's on the top line with Jonathan Taves. So do that logic for me. I did not understand that one bit, but that was definitely something interesting. But let's transition to the Rangers because they also sent someone down in Vitaly Kravtsov, something you're a little bit hot on. Let's look at that situation first before we dive into the rest of the Rangers.
Yeah, let's just look at right wing, which is a position that's changed a lot for the Rangers in recent months. So they don't have any sure depth there anymore. The Rangers had a bright future going. And then they spent this offseason overreacting to one incident, getting way more physical and tough at the expense of putting the puck in the net. And they actively got worse in the offseason, which is really frustrating in itself. But just looking at right wing, it started with the horrifying Pavel Buchnevich trade to the Blues that I still hate and still don't understand to this day, because the two main arguments for it at the time outside of cap space were more playing time for the kids at the position, namely Kravtsov, who's 20 years old, and or that it would lead to a bigger move, most likely for Jack Eichel, who is somehow still on the Buffalo Sabres. So none of that happened, right? Kravtsov, then, I understand he is not perfect in this situation, but ninth overall pick in 2018. He was sent down to the AHL when he first got drafted, which isn't exactly abnormal, but he didn't like that. Went to back to Russia for a bit. Chris Drury was Hartford's GM at the time, so he should have gotten to know him a little bit, know the situation. Now, he eventually comes back. He finished last season with the Rangers. Yeah, it was okay. Did not have a great preseason. I understand that, but he came back expecting to, at the very least, be on the third line. And I think you got to at least give him that opportunity. Instead, the Rangers sent him down to the AHL again. And it sounds like Kravtsov is refusing to report to Hartford. He's going to end up suspended for now, in exile, I guess. We've seen that before. And most likely getting traded for pennies on the dollar because the Rangers have torpedoed his trade value, which is a master class in how to not manage your assets, for one thing. And you look at the roster, like they said, Julian Gauthier, Dryden Hunt beat him out for spots, which is dumb enough. But Kravtsov is not, you don't have to expose him to waivers, so nobody can claim him. That's one thing. But if somebody claims Gauthier or especially Dryden Hunt, do you really care? I know I don't. And even more damning than that to me is Libor Hayek is on the roster as an eighth defenseman because the Rangers are trying desperately to get anything for him of value because you can lose him on waivers. He's your eighth defenseman at best, man. Who gives a fuck? You got to prioritize the guy who you invested the ninth overall pick in, even though he's not perfect, because this is eerily similar to the Elias Anderson situation from a year or two ago, a top 10 pick who pouted when he was sent back down before, went to back to Europe and ended up getting traded for next to nothing on the draft day to the Kings a year or two ago. So it's just, it's inexcusable. That's just flushing away two top 10 picks in consecutive drafts. I'm just red about it because it's incredibly stupid and short-sighted.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, he's a young kid, and if your thought process in that area was, hey, let's trade away Buchnevich, which you are obviously not a fan of, and let's give them some playing time, you would think that they would probably give them some playing time, right? So instead, like you mentioned, the physicality, they bring in a Ryan Reeves type. He sits there on the fourth line. You called that one, by the way. I'll give you a shout out there. You said new coaching staff takes over, physicality. They're going to bring one of his own guys. Sure enough, Ryan Reeves came over. So I'll tip my hockey helmet to you on that one. But let's look at the rest of this Rangers team. Adam Fox, let's look at some more positivity here. He was the best defenseman in the league last year. A great defenseman. They have a solid defense. You know, they got Ryan Lindred, Keandre Miller's look great. Trouba's solid. I mean, they're deep at defense too. So they might be a team that's physical up front. Maybe they're trying to adapt a little bit of the Islanders play style of just trying to be physical and play some defense, which I don't think would work. But how do you feel about the defense?
Well, the defense has talent. It's relatively similar to last year in terms of the top four is going to be the same. Lindgren and Fox is going to be one pairing, which is a good one. And Keandre Miller and Jacob Trouba will be the second one, which it should at least be solid. I am really curious to see. Miller, I thought, had a really solid rookie season. He was one of those guys who didn't spend any time in Hartford. He just stuck with the Rangers out of camp and on the second pair, too, and played well. So I'm hoping to see an improvement from him. I think Trouba's a decent partner for him. The third pair is where the changes are this year. Last year, it was mostly Brendan Smith, who's gone, and Hayek, who is not good, frankly. This year, it's going to be Patrick Nemeth, who's a decent third pair defenseman on a decent contract. And I'm hoping at least that Niels Lundqvist will be the primary defenseman on the other side of him. But, you know, tonight in the opener, the Rangers put Jared fucking Tenorti in there instead, who is just terrible at hockey. And it did not go very well. So it's going to be a lot of youth on that Rangers defense is essentially what I'm getting at outside of Trouba and Nemeth. So a lot of upside, a lot of question marks, but they, like you mentioned, the Rangers are really deep defensively, which is why Hayek isn't really going to play unless there's a slew of injuries. Because even if he plays now, right now, I just mentioned 7 guys. So he's at best your 8th defenseman. And in the organizational pecking order as a whole, you have Zach Jones, who played briefly last year, who's ahead of him. Braden Schneider's a first-round pick from last year that's going to be an important piece either on the Rangers blue line or in a trade. Matthew Robertson is back there. So essentially, they're going to have to trade a couple of those guys eventually. But Jones and Schneider at Hartford right now, I mean, they're deep on defense, and there's a lot of different directions they can go in terms of getting the better on the blue line right now in their own zone, or using some of those guys to trade for a center or a right wing where the Rangers do not have that depth.
Yeah, I look at it here. You know, let's look at the forwards. Right? You know, I think they have a solid top 6. I do. I mean, you look at that. You got Lafreniere, you got Zibanejad, Kreider. He's getting older, but I mean, hey, he's still a serviceable veteran forward on that team. And you got Artemi Panarin, Ryan Strome, Capo Caco. Look, you got the young players that are playing a little bit there with Lafreniere and Caco. The only difference was you had Buchnevich ahead of him last year. You had some other pieces around them offensively that helped out their game. Barclay Goodrow's there, Philip Hedl. And then obviously Sammy Blythe, who came over, being one of those. And then Rooney and Ryan Reeves, of course, the big physical addition. How do you feel about the forwards?
It's going to be relying on the guys in the top 6 to score because I don't think they're going to get any help from the bottom half of the lineup. It's just there's not skill throughout all 4 lines. I mean, okay, you got guys who can finish their checks. They are not guys who can handle the puck. They're always going to be chasing it. So I think that is going to be very detrimental in itself in the bottom 6. It might be more balanced, might be a little bit more difficult to play against, but I don't know. They gave up 5 goals in the opener tonight, so I don't know how intimidating they really were. Top 6 is talented. I mean, Lafreniere, I think, is like I think 50 points is a decent expectation for him in a full season. I'd like to see him get to that number. Zibanejad just got a big contract extension, so we definitely need him to produce. He was a lot better at the end of last year after a really slow start. But yeah, you got Kreider, who I wasn't a big fan of the extension even before the Rangers lucked into Lafreniere. And hindsight's 2020 sense. They're moving him to right wing for the first time in his career at age 30, which is a big risk. I think Kakko's looked a lot better so far in the preseason. It was okay tonight, but the team's going to go as far as Zibanejad and Panarin can take them because they're the 2 clear elite or top of the class. Panarin's the best wing on the team, one of the best in the league. Zibanejad's clearly the best center. I think the X factor, the only guy in the bottom 6 who I think has some of that offensive dynamic ability is Philip Hedl. Outside of that, I'm not expecting more than 5 to 10 goals at most from the Sammy Blaze or Barclay Goodrows of the world, and sure as hell not anyone behind them.
Do you still think there's a chance they trade for a center here in the coming, say, about a month?
It depends. I think if they do, either Strom or Hedel would have to be part of the package going the other way, which, depending on who's available, would be interesting to see. I think now you almost have to consider a right wing possibility. It's a shame they don't have somebody who was capable of driving play offensively and got better every year, and then was eventually a penalty killer at the end, who's all of a sudden on the Blues for no good reason. So creating problems themselves is what I'm getting at. I think they could trade for a center. I think they might have to consider trading for a wing just to try to atone for their own mistake from a couple months ago too. It's really, really frustrating to me. I think Hedel is going to have a good season. I really do like him, but he has to stay healthy. But the fourth line, I think, is just going to be a detriment. I think it's going to be Kevin Rooney's a decent forward who can kill penalties and is okay on faceoffs. But Reeves is just a physical guy. He can be a dirty player, too. That adds absolutely nothing else as a hockey player. Dryden Hunt's just okay. I think Gauthier has talent. Yeah, he was a first-round pick. He didn't play tonight. I expect him to play more in Gallant's system. But he has 2 goals in 47 NHL games. So you're just relying on offense a lot from the top 6. If there's any injuries there, this team's going to be lucky to score 2 goals tonight.
Let's look at the goaltenders real quick. They got 2 young ones. We've been talking about them a lot on the show, Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Georgiev. And I was a little bit shocked to see Georgiev start the season opener tonight. Did you think that was something in the works? Or I was, as a casual NHL fan, I turned on the game and I saw Georgiev in the net and I was a little bit surprised.
Yeah, I don't like it at all. But the Capitals did it with Vanacek too. They're both of them play the second game of a back-to-back tomorrow night or later tonight when this drops. And in the Rangers' case, apparently they wanted Shesterkin to be the guy for their home opener instead. Which, you give him the 4-year extension and then you don't start him in the first game of the season. I don't like that at all. And Georgiev, I did not think played well tonight, and I think he peaked a couple years ago and probably should have sold high on him. I like Shesterkin a lot. I think it was wise to give him a 4-year contract now, buy out a couple of years where he could have been a free agent without that contract. Might save them a little money on those 2 years, but I'm going to make a prediction here. I think Keith Kincaid will be the backup goalie for most of this season. I have a feeling Georgiev either gets demoted or traded.
Demoted? That's a hot take. He might be demoted. Okay.
I mean, I think he would have to pass through waivers, and the Rangers aren't just going to expose him for nothing, but he doesn't have the trade value he did a couple years ago. So I think we might be packaging him in if we throw him in a trade. Yeah, any hypothetical, whether it's Eichel or anyone else who might become available that might want a goalie to split time. But yeah, I don't see that one ending well. And I thought it was really, really bizarre that he started the first game.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked by that too. I mean, I seriously think Shesterkin has the ability to be a top 15, top 10 goaltender in the league. I mean, he has the potential, and you give him that big contract. You have the defense in front of you. You're going up against Alex Ovechkin on opening night. You'd think you put your big guns out there and try to win a hockey game, but I guess they went with Georgiev, and that was a situation that head coach Gerard Gallant is capable, that he thinks he's ready to make. So I want to get your thoughts on the coaching staff as we wrap up the Rangers. How do you feel about the Gallant hire? I know you were not the biggest Quinn fan.
No, I was. And of the available coaches, I thought Gallant was a decent choice. The Rangers are clearly trying to win right now, as flawed as that might be. And they're trying to open their Stanley Cup window early. They're trying to win one in the next 3 to 4 years. I'm skeptical of that happening, but I hope it does. Look, the Rangers, the reasons for optimism are they have Panarin, Zibanejad, Adam Fox, and Shesterkin back. So they have one potentially elite player at wing, center, defense, and goaltender. Not that saying that they all are, but they all could be. And the other reasons for optimism are all the young talent that does still exist. You could see Fox get better. He just played his second season and he already has a Norris Trophy. He should theoretically improve on that. Keandre Miller should improve in his second year. I'm curious to see what Lundqvist can do on defense. And then up front, obviously, with hopeful and expected improvements of Lafreniere and Kakko. So there's a lot of young talent on the team. If some of these guys take leaps forward, the Rangers could make the playoffs. If they don't, they're going to be in the middle of the pack in the Metro again. The coaching staff, I think tonight was not, I don't think the Rangers were ever serious about winning this game. They put out all of their physical players. They put Tenorti and Reeves in there and Dryden Hunt, and they didn't play Gauthier or Niels Lundqvist. And they didn't even fight Tom Wilson after all that. So what? It's just something really, really Rangers about that. They overreact to a huge incident. They have an opportunity to at least get this bullshit out of their system in game one, and then they don't even take advantage of it. I thought that was weird. I think tomorrow's lineup against the Stars will be a better indicator of the lineup we'll see more often going forward.
Do you think there's a chance that the fights didn't occur tonight because the score is a little bit out of hand? The other team didn't want to drop the gloves?
Score didn't get out of hand until the second period, maybe even early third, depending on how you look at it. I mean, last time they played the Capitals, there were the line brawl right at the beginning of the
Right.
game and 100 penalty minutes in the first period. And I knew that wasn't going to happen. But outside of the one kind of fight with Blay, there really wasn't a whole lot to speak of. There were a lot of penalties, a couple of double minors for roughing, but just considering all the physicality they put in the lineup, and then when it did get out of hand, you figure you at least get a couple of punches off like Kadarius Toney did, and they didn't even bother with that. So I don't understand it.
Wow. How about that? Kadarius Toney throws more punches than Ryan Reeves. Write that in the newspaper. There's your
What
headline.
the fuck is that, man?
There's your headline. So let's look at their season prediction. I mean, not their season prediction. Like, where do you think they finish here in the Metro Division?
I don't think it's going to be as bad. I don't have the same feeling I did with the Giants, but I don't think it's going to be good. I think they'll be fifth at best in the division, maybe sixth.
I see them at 5. I think Penguins, Capitals, Hurricanes, and Islanders are better than them. That's where I sit right now. I don't think the Flyers are better. The Devils aren't better. The Blue Jackets are weird. I think the Rangers are at 5. So that's where I think I sit on them. Maybe they leapfrog if there's any injuries to some other teams. Obviously, you don't wish that, but it could happen in the NHL season. So maybe the Rangers take advantage of that. But let's head over to the New York Islanders. The Islanders, a team that's been to the postseason the last few years. They've been to the Stanley Cup playoffs. We've seen them, talked about them a lot down the stretch and their talent, and Ilya Sorokin and Semyon Varlamov and the defensive structure of Barry Trotz and Matthew Barzal and all those great things. Where do you stand right now with the New York Islanders?
I think this one's a little bit more clear cut. They are, to me, the favorite to win this division and one of the better teams in the NHL. I do really, really think that this is a year that they can possibly overtake either the Penguins or the Capitals, more specifically. I think they've won the division several years in a row now. So I have high expectations for them. The Islanders were able to bring back a lot of these potential free agents. They were able to clear a little bit of cap space with the loss of Jordan Eberle in the expansion draft. They're getting Anders Lee back, which I think is going to be huge for them. I think they really did miss him in that playoff series, but they were able to bring everybody else back by losing Eberle in his contract and then trading Nick Leddy to Detroit. All of a sudden, they were able to play some financial games there, and some of the guys we thought that might leave, Kyle Palmieri, Casey Cizikas, they're back, and they also added a couple of veteran pieces to try to put this over the top.
One of them is Zdeno Chara. He returns back to New York. I mean, he's sort of going on his farewell tour. Maybe he ends up in Ottawa, where he also played when he was younger. So, I mean, keep an eye out for Zdeno Chara. He's staying out there on the ice and he's doing all the things that he will. So maybe he could win another Stanley Cup here with Barry Trotz. Obviously, being a Rangers fan, you don't hope that's the case, but you're right. This team is very good. I also agree with your point on Anders Lee. He was so good for this team. And, they made the acquisition at the deadline to bring in Palmieri, to bring in a couple of players from the Devils that could really help out the scoring a little bit there. But they were a little bit quiet in the playoffs. But I think bringing over Anders Lee, finally getting healthy, and to go with everything with this Islanders team is going to only help them as we head into the season.
Yeah, I still think we can agree that the defense is the identity for the Islanders under Barry Trotz, and that reunited pair, or that returning pair of Adam Pelech and Ryan Pulock, is going to be a big key for them. And Pelech got the big contract extension. And while you look at the Rangers, for example, Fox especially, and Miller to a lesser extent, of guys who can make so many plays happen offensively as well, the Islanders, I wouldn't say are like that. They're not relying on their defensemen to be huge point producers overall. I think Pulock might have the most offensive upside, but no one's going to confuse him for Erik Karlsson either. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just not what they're looking to get out of their defensemen. I think the X factor, outside of that top pair, which I think we can rely on to be very, very good, if not great again, is Noah Dobson. Yeah, the younger defenseman who was a little bit inconsistent, but we saw some flashes of that talent that he has. Because outside of him, they have Scott Mayfield back, and I'm curious to see who he ends up pairing with. But I don't love the idea of him pairing with either Chara or Andy Green at this point in their careers. I like not that they haven't been solid, and Chara particularly the bookend effect coming back to the Islanders where he started, but both of them are mostly just stay-at-home defensive defensemen at this point, and I think that might limit them a little bit defensively. Like I still think it's going to be a strength, but it might make their second and third pair slightly one-dimensional.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I can get behind it. This defense is solid. I mean, it doesn't really matter what they have. I mean, one slip up doesn't really affect this Islanders team because of everything that happens on the defensive end. You have the Pulaks, you have the great players around you there. Scott Mayfield, another great defenseman. I mean, there's a lot that goes on. And let's look at the forwards though. Let's head over and see what the forwards are bringing to this team. Zach Parise, I think was a great addition. Obviously, he's up there in age. Another one of those veterans they added. This one a forward. I mean, there's still not a ton of goal scoring on this team. JG Pageau showed a lot of promise in the postseason. I don't think that he is. I mean, we know what JG Pageau is. He's going to put up a fair amount of points, and I mean, he's not going to be a superstar by any means. But for an Islanders team, he can still put up enough that helps their offensive production.
Yeah, obviously Matt Barzal is the best player on the Islanders, and definitely their best forward at least. And he can do some ridiculous things. Now, getting Anders Lee back on one side compared to Leo Komarov will definitely help him as well. And then I think we might see those two and Kyle Palmieri be the top line, because that second line the Islanders have had for a while now of Brock Nelson, Anthony Beauvillier, and Josh Bailey, I think is a really underrated one. And I don't think any of them are huge point producers, but these are all really consistent above average guys who aren't flashy. They might be some of the more underrated players in the league. And then Pageau's line on the third, I think, is going to be one of the bigger X factors, because a guy who might be on his wing is Oliver Wahlstrom, who the Rangers could have drafted instead of Kravtsov, by the way. And Wahlstrom, though, is a guy who's struggled a little bit to get out of Barry Trotz's doghouse. And I'm curious to see how much of a leash he has, because I've read rumors and I've read articles on The Athletic and a couple other sources where Trotz isn't a huge fan of him. And the let's say the young but inconsistent element he brings to the team. And I'm curious to see if Richard Panik ends up getting in the lineup instead, or if he ends up being a scratch at some point, because he just doesn't seem to be a guy that Trotz is a huge fan of, from what I can tell. The Islanders are committed to getting him some top 9 minutes. They don't want him playing on the fourth line, but I'm curious to see how long that experiment lasts.
I hate that you brought up Richard Panik. He was not the best for the Blackhawks. But, Wahlstrom, he's a solid player. He did put up 21 points in 44 games last year. He's still only 21 years of age. I mean, he is what, if you want some sort of bright spot offensively, that's what you're looking for if you're this Islanders team. He might not be Barry's guy where he preaches all this consistency and making sure no one does anything, no turnovers, make sure you're cleaning the neutral ice, all those great things that you really want. But I think that's a risk you can take with everyone else being so, I hate to keep reusing the word, but structured, knowing their roles, knowing what they're going to do. I think you can take that risk with someone like a Wahlstrom on the outside, and maybe that's what we'll see later on if he can get out of that doghouse.
I personally, if I'm an Islanders fan, I want to see him get opportunities with other talented offensive linemen. Pageau definitely qualifies. There definitely is some upside there for those two. Because the fourth line it's going to be Martin, Cizikas, Clutterbuck. I know Matt Martin, I believe, is injured to start this season, but he will come back. And the Islanders have had a surprising amount of continuity on their fourth line over the years, and they're better as a unit than they are individually. That second line I mentioned with Nelson and them, they've been around a long time now. So I think we're starting to see this is the window for the Islanders. I think it's going to be open another year or two, and they're going to make the runs for it right now. I think the Parise signing is solid. I think he'll slide in on that other side with Pageau and Wahlstrom, because one guy who's kind of got lost in the shuffle outside of them is Kiefer Bellows, because he's just not really going to be a factor anymore. And we talked about both of them last year, two recent first round picks of the team.
Yeah, we did. We talked about Kiefer Bellows a lot. He was someone that I kept an eye on as well. Let's look at the goalies though. Before we get into their division, where we think they'll end, it's the same division as the Rangers. It's just where we think the Islanders will finish. Let's look at the goaltenders. And Ilya Sorokin, Semyon Varlamov starting the year on the injured reserve. He's got an injury right now. It's just, I think they said it's not going to be too serious, just an undisclosed injury that it might need a little bit more time. He's obviously getting a little bit up there in age. Corey Schneider ends up stepping in. He'll probably be the backup, I would assume, for Sorokin during the time being. And so, yeah, that's where I think I think they still have a great tandem there with Varlamov and Sorokin. Sorokin, I think, makes a bigger leap this year. Maybe he cuts a little bit into that playing time. And when you have a defense like that in front of you, I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, that definitely will help ease him in a little bit. We saw some good things from him. Like Varlamov has been amazing for the Islanders, and there were definitely some justified questions when the Islanders let Robin Lehner go to bring in Varlamov on a 4-year deal. And he had a solid first year, and then just exploded last year, where he was arguably the best or one of the best goalies in the league. He was really that good. But Sorokin is still the future for the Islanders, and I think this is a big opportunity with Varlamov, who had that undisclosed injury. He's just now getting back to skating. He's going to miss at least a little time. And I don't think the Islanders want to use Corey Schneider at all unless they absolutely have to. He's had a great career. He's just not the player he was. He's more of an emergency backup, I would assume. So here's a big chance for Sorokin to stake his claim. I'm the future, and hell, maybe even he's the present if he plays well enough. Varlamov is still going to play, but I could see that one turning into a pretty 50-50 situation. And it's going to be an interesting start to the year because with the Islanders finally getting moved into a new arena, they're starting this season with a 13-game road trip.
Yeah, that's rough. It's gonna take a toll on you, traveling that much and starting on the road. But hey, maybe later on in the season it helps because you can finally gain some momentum when you do get back home, and maybe it's something you look forward to as you head there. But to your point there on Corey Schneider, you mentioned about his he wasn't where he was in his early career. I remember him on Vancouver early in my childhood days when the Blackhawks and Canucks would go at it. And I still remember the incident where Duncan Keith got his hair pulled and Rafi Torres and all the pricks over there in Vancouver. But, it was something else. But let's look at the division predictions here from the standpoint of the New York Islanders. Do you think they get it done and finish in first place?
Yeah, I honestly do. I think they will win this division. I think the Capitals are going to have to not finish first eventually, and the question there is maybe some inconsistent goaltending is a possibility. And they're definitely getting older. You could make a similar argument for the Penguins. I think the teams that are a little bit younger and on the rise, the Islanders are a more veteran team too, but I think they're in slightly better shape with those two possibly fading a little. Them and I think the Hurricanes are going to be near the top of this division as well. I really like what they've been doing.
Yeah, Carolina always worries me because I don't really like their goaltending situation. They try to be aggressive, but they don't bring in the guys they should bring in. So that really worries me a little bit. And I know I'm going to throw an egg out here and see if it sticks. I don't think that's something you say, but I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Penguins to finish first in this division. Maybe, just maybe, if the Hawks fall out and they don't look good, Marc-Andre Fleury returns to Pittsburgh to wrap up his career in the second half at the deadline, and that's your goaltending issue fixed. You get the veterans of Crosby and Malkin back, and you have yourself another run there. New York Islanders finish in second place in this division. That's where I got them.
You just gave me some horrifying flashbacks.
My apologies. That's going to wrap it up for today. Hockey episode, NHL predictions. So when you come back and realize, all right, were they right? Were they wrong? This is the video you're at. So make sure you mark this one as it drops. So just a heads up, we do drop content every Thursday. Comes out at noon Eastern time. Be sure to check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts, any platform. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a review, and all that good stuff. We'll be back. NBA content coming up next week. Make sure you check that one out. We'll be diving into the Knicks, Nets, and the Bulls, of course. And, it's going to be a lot of fun as we head into that. So be sure to keep an eye out for the content coming next week. But until next time, for Swig, I'm Dylan Kearns. This is a Big City Sports Podcast.